is what this author believed happened with our country. Our President Wilson was lying flat on his back, suffering from a stroke. Now, how to get the stroke was simply, he'd already had a few strokes before, but when his treaty was not ratified, he went around the country campaigning, urging people to urge their senators to vote for the treaty. His doctors warned him, hey, Mr. Wilson, you're working too hard. Wilson had a terrible stroke from which he never fully recovered. And during this time, our country was without a president. The extent of the stroke was kept super secret. And yes, we did have a president. The vice president, knowing the president was not dead, refused to act. Now today, we have the 25th Amendment, and the vice president can act if the president is deemed to be unconscious, incapable of acting. So guess who served as president? Mrs. Wilson. I don't know how many bills she signed into law. I don't know how many bills she vetoed. I don't know how many generals she ordered around, but she actually served secretly as president, forging her husband's signature. But nobody could see the president himself except for maybe his doctor, nobody else. Eventually the president got up and was able to work a little bit, no more than 1 hour a day. And then we had another president after him, Harding, who was inept, and some people believe that Harding's lack. All right, the point I'm trying to make for all that is the Depression ended because the people knew their government was not going to get them out of it. Now in a few minutes we're going to talk about another depression where the government promised to get them out of it, and it lasted for 11 years. Are you catching my drift, folk? The more help you get from the government, the worse off you are. You shouldn't say that, but I said it. All right. Anyway, but there was a short depression. Now, yeah, the story is told that Mr. Wilson finally started to hold a cabinet meeting. So there was the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State, you know, the Postmaster General, all in the cabinet meeting. And all of a sudden, Mrs. Wilson had the door partly open, listening in. And all of a sudden, the president started talking incoherently. Mrs. Wilson rushed in the room, told the cabinet to leave, and said, don't tell anyone anything about this, and rushed her husband out of the room and off to bed. Basically, she was controlling him and controlling the government too, but doing it in secret. Anyway, Wilson never fully recovered and died in 1924, not quite in his right mind. All right. Now, in 1929 in October, now folk, I've lived through several Octobers, and I do study the stock market extensively. October is often the worst month for the stock market. In October 1929, there was a stock market crash. Here was the main thing that caused it. Now keep in mind, there was no computerized investing. You had to invest through a broker. A bunch of rich tycoons, among them Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., the father of President John Kennedy, went to their brokers one evening, the evening before, and then actually the afternoon before, and they all cashed in their stock at a high price, knowing that their doing so would bring the market down. And then once the market was down, they went back and bought it at a lower price. This is called shorting the market. And Joseph Kennedy Sr. was one of the ones that cost Joseph Kennedy the presidency. I mean, it was well known he'd done this. And yes, Joseph Kennedy, we once asked, no, my 6th grade teacher, I was in 6th grade when John Kennedy was running for president, and she hinted about somehow how Joseph Kennedy got his money. But she wouldn't tell us. So I went and asked my dad, and my dad said, oh, bootlegging. This was largely true, but he also got a lot of money by shorting the market. Bringing the price down, getting it together, him and his buddies, bring the price down and buying it the next day at a lower price. But what they did not count on, was a big global depression, or maybe they planned it. We really don't know what caused the depression of the 30s. Now your book will say what happened was that factories were producing more than they could sell, and also these factories What they should have done with the money they made, the profits, was paid it to the workers in higher wages, one, which would give them the workers more buying power, or paid it to their shareholders in dividends, which would have given their shareholders more buying power. Instead, they used this money to build a bigger factory and invest in more, and put out more, and the workers didn't have the ability to buy. Eventually, the factories had to shut down. Now here's where President Herbert Hoover made his big mistake, one of his big mistakes. Herbert Hoover told the factory owners, well, stay in, keep your employees working, and somehow this depression will end by itself. Bad. Instead, it made the depression worse. The stock market crashed in 1929. The depression was to last through 1930, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37. In 1938 and 39, it got even worse. The depression finally ended in 1940 when World War II broke out. Broke out in Europe in 1939, and in our country it ended when our government decided to help Great Britain fight the war. We did not join the war right then. We didn't join the war until late in 1941. But the World War II ended the Depression. In the meantime, we elected a president named Franklin Roosevelt. But in Germany, they put a man in office named Adolf Hitler. Now, Adolf Hitler had tried to take over the government in the beer hall putsch in 1923. And he had failed. He'd spent some time in prison. But then he decided a way to take over through constitutional means. So he organized the party. Yes?
Wait, he tried to take over what?
Hitler tried to take over Germany in 1923 in the beer hall putsch. You know, he was going to march in. He had a bunch of troops. And he might have done it, except of all people to turn around and run, Adolf Hitler himself hit the dirt and then jumped up, turned around and ran. And if you're in a fight, a military situation, and you see your leader run from the battlefield, guess what you're going to do? It's happened time and time again throughout history. When they saw Hitler get up and run, if Hitler would have shown the courage to rally his men, hey, because he outnumbered the people he was fighting against, he might have taken over then. As it was, he fled, he was arrested, given a trial, put in prison. While in prison, he wrote his book, Mein Kampf, which he had 700 pages in which he told the world what he was going to do if he ever got in power. But the prosperous years of the 20s were lean years for Hitler. Hitler could not operate much until the Depression occurred. Then when the Depression occurred, that was when he promised, I can end the Depression. He took over. I mean, there's been many a book written about how he did it. He took over and even took over the churches. And once he had taken over, he began his program of building up Germany's armament. All right, there's a story that was told about a young man who had just gotten married, and he got a job at a factory, and he was told this factory is a baby carriage factory. Well, his wife was about to have a baby, and he thought, hey, I'm going to steal the end products of each department. So each day he'd go around to the department and grab the end products of that department. The baby carriage was assembled somewhere else. This factory made the parts, but the baby carriage was assembled somewhere else. He got home and assembled the parts, and he had not a baby carriage, but a machine gun. Should have shaped him up pretty good, but anyway, these stories like this are told, and also stories are told about people who just disappeared. A neighbor would speak against Hitler today, the next day you wouldn't see him again. You might eventually hear he'd been sent to some camp called a concentration camp. Concentration camps still make news from time to time. Anyway, Hitler took over. Now, Time Magazine, and folks, this you can find the actual Time Magazine. Time Magazine named Adolf Hitler Man of the Year. I believe the year was 1938. Hitler ended the Depression in Germany. He ended it by drafting every unemployed man into the army and by putting his people to work making armaments, getting ready for the next war. Oh, he built roads, I mean, he built airplanes, he built artillery, heavy artillery, he built munitions. He put his people to work. And in short order, Germany was out of the Depression. They also were rid of their democracy. Now, a man named John Maynard Keynes told the world how to solve the Depression problem. He said that when the Depression hits a country, the government of that country should start a massive works program by building bridges and roads. Just a massive program. And they might ask, well, where would the money come from? Oh, Keynes had the answer. You'd borrow the money. Basically, the government would spend money it didn't have by borrowing. And then, when the Depression was over, the government would pay back what it borrowed. All right, folks. He wrote this in the 1930s. Now, what's been the result? Governments of the world have spent money that they didn't have, borrowed money, and when the Depression is over, they keep borrowing more. To make a long story short, the debt is not paid off. And the debt goes deeper and deeper and deeper. Yes?
Do you think that might play to a fact of how much debt the U.S. is with the other places in the world?
If you look at this history of the national debt was paid off by Andrew Jackson, completely paid off. The country was out of debt. But then during the Civil War, the debt got up. After the Civil War, the debt went down. Then came World War I, and the debt went up again. But then between the war, Harding and Coolidge brought the debt down. Then came the Depression, and the debt went back up. Then the Depression, the war came, and the debt really went up. But then when the war was over, the Depression was over, we developed a socialistic attitude, and that made the debt bigger and bigger and bigger. And to make a long story short, nobody has paid the debt down. The budget has only been balanced 2 times since World War II. Nixon did it once, and Bill Clinton did it twice. 2 men. And in the case of Bill Clinton, he had the good fortune. The Far Eastern markets, the Japanese and Korean markets and Hong Kong markets are found to be crooked. And people pulled the money out of those markets and put them in American markets. And Bill Clinton then was given credit for something he didn't do, but nevertheless, the country prospered, so I'm going to hand it to him. Also, Bill Clinton ran the country like a Republican. Your book says that. So, Bill Clinton ran the country like a Republican, but the country prospered, and he was able to balance his budget twice during the 8 years he was in office. But otherwise, it's called Keynesian economics. It does not work. The fact is, anything you could do was not really going to help that Depression until the government really spent money like crazy. Like I say, when war had a few, but what does war have to do with Depression? In wartime, everybody works. It was like Americans woke up one morning and learned that all the factories in town were begging for workers. They were making war goods. All the factories in town, and factories were even trying to steal each other's workers, and everybody who wanted a job, the dad would go off to look for work and not come home that night until late. He not only worked that day, but he worked overtime, and he told his family, well, I've got a good job. And the Depression was over. That was until 1940. Roosevelt promised to end the Depression, and he got a program called the New Deal. The New Deal would build bridges, among other things, build highways, build roads. When I was a kid, we'd see a lot of these New Deal bridges. They would have WPA written on the side of the bridge. And they were mostly small one-lane bridges. You had to stop and be careful before you crossed them. And the big trucks could not cross them. Eventually, all these bridges were replaced. And I want to say this about it's called our infrastructure. our infrastructure in 2019 has some serious, serious issues. As our bridges are aging and as some of our highways and roads are aging, and we've had a few bridges collapse, and nobody has the money to replace them. I don't know how the problem will be solved, but anyway, Keynes would say, let the government spend. Well, hey, the government's already spending a lot more than it takes in. And our national debt is going in. Oh yeah, we have a debt ceiling. When we get close to that ceiling, we raise the ceiling. Get close to that ceiling, raise the ceiling again. What good is the ceiling? All right, anyway, Roosevelt got a program called the New Deal that did not end the Depression. In fact, the Depression continued to get worse. In France, the Depression also worsened. Germany faced crisis after crisis until Hitler brought some kind of an order to Germany. Now, in Russia, folk, Russia had just embraced communism. Russia had some good harvest. The weather was cooperative. And about 25 million Russians, Soviet citizens, died of starvation. Didn't you just say Russia had good harvest? Yeah. The problem was not the harvest. The problem was the peasants who did the farming were told, now turn in all your produce to the central government, and the central government will give you back what you need. Didn't work that way. Maybe with today's computers, but they didn't have computers, and nobody could manage. I mean, keep in mind, the Soviet Union was huge. And a lot of areas were neglected as far as this redistribution of the wealth. A lot of areas were neglected. Again, they didn't have computers. The people who worked in the distribution were overworked. If Russia would have had a capitalistic system, well, it would have been better, because capitalists will find out where the bread is needed and take it there, find out where they can sell their stuff and go there. But anyway, Lenin finally relented a little bit and allowed a partial return to capitalism, and the famine was largely relieved after Lenin had allowed some capitalism to return. Well, Lenin did not like Stalin, and he feared that Stalin would win. Well, when Lenin died, there was no provision in the Constitution how that who was to take over next, so they decided who was to take over by power struggle. In the power struggle, Stalin won. All right. But that is a subject for a later chapter. Stalin was more dictatorial than the Tsars had ever been. All right, folks.